Okay guys, so we are going to fill out this little handout here, and it's going to introduce us to exponential functions, and hopefully you remember most of this from Algebra 2 from last year, but just a nice little review for you. So in an exponential function, the variable, which we usually use an x, but it could be other letters, is located in the exponent. And I think that the name exponential function then makes a lot of sense. You can see that the word exponent is in that name. So that's how, when I was your age, I always remembered what an exponential function is. Now, we are asked to construct the graph of y equals 2 to the x. And anytime you have to make a graph and you're not quite sure what it's going to look like, you can do a little chart here. We can plug in some, I'm going to do some positives and we'll do some negatives. And you're going to have to remember some stuff about exponents here to fill out this little chart. If I plug in a 0 right here, 2 to the 0 is 1. 2 to the first is 2. 2 squared would be 4. 2 to the negative 1 actually makes that a fraction 1/2, and 2 to the negative 2 makes that fraction 1/4. And so this chart actually gives us a lot of points that we can now plot. So, draw a little coordinate plane here, get some tick marks. And 0, 1, that's right here. 1, 2, 2, 4. And then we'll have to estimate here, negative 1, 1/2, negative 2, 1/4. And so we start to get some points that are actually located on the graph. And here it's helpful to sort of remember from Algebra 2 the general shape. And that's going to look like this. Okay, now, this graph, you might notice, if I were to keep making some points on this chart, if I were to keep using negatives for my x values, well, I would get smaller and smaller fractions, but nothing would ever be negative. The exponential graph of y equals 2 to the x above can never have a negative value, and thus has what we call an asymptote on the x-axis. And I would normally signify that with like a little dashed line. Remember, an asymptote is like an imaginary wall that the graph cannot cross. So this particular graph would never cross this asymptote. It would just keep getting closer and closer. Now, if we look at another exponential function, something like y equals 2x minus 3, again, we can make a nice little chart. Although some of you may remember that this minus 3 is what we call a vertical translation. And so even before we make this chart, you should be expecting in the end that this previous graph, this one up here, would just get moved down 3 units. Okay, but we're going to verify that with a nice little chart here. And let's pick the same x value, 0, 1, 2, and then negative 1, negative 2. So plug in a 0 for x. 2 to the 0 is 1. 1 minus 3 would get me negative 2. Plug in a 1 for x. 2 minus 3 is negative 1. Plug in a 2, that's 4 minus 3, that's 1. And then a little mental math necessary here. Let me clean up my chart. We're going to have 1/2 minus 3, which would be 1/2 minus 6/2, which is negative 5/2, negative 2.5. And then if I plug in the negative 2, that's 1/4 minus 3, or 1/4 minus 12/4, which would be negative 11 over 4. Okay, so make our little coordinate plane here. Alright, so let's see. Plot some points. We've got 0, negative 2 right there. 1 comma negative 1, that's right there. 2 comma 1 would be right there. Negative 1 comma negative 5 halves, that's about right there. And this one will be a little bit lower. Negative 11 fourths is negative 2 and 3/4. So, and what's going to happen is that asymptote, it's no longer at 0, it's now at negative 3. It makes sense, it got shifted down 3 units. If I were to keep plugging in negative exponents, I would keep getting closer and closer to negative 3. For those of you who are struggling to see with these fractions, I don't normally like to use decimals, but it might visually help you. This is negative 2.5, and this would be negative 2.75. So if I were to plug in negative 3, this would become negative 2 point something, a little closer to negative 3. So you would get closer and closer to negative 3, but you would never hit it. So that's why we have an asymptote now at the line y equals negative 3. So hopefully this brushed you up on some stuff about exponents, exponential functions, what they look like, how they have an asymptote. We're going to keep talking more about exponential functions, but that's good for now.